In 2015, British politics was hit by a thunderbolt. Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party and began steering the party to the left. The political establishment were horrified and made several crude attempts to derail him. Yet he somehow survived, even gaining a near record vote for Labour in the 2017 general election. They needed to try something else. And so we got this. On July 10th, 2019, the BBC broadcast a panorama programme entitled Is Labour Anti-Semitic? Presented by John Ware, sometimes referred to as an investigative journalist. The title suggests an inquiry into what is, after all, a very serious charge against a major political party. The programme begins with 7 Jewish Labour Party members making distressing claims of anti-Semitic experiences within the party.
I've been the unfortunate victim of a lot of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and stuff I never thought I'd receive in 2019, let alone in the party that I thought was anti-racist. I wouldn't say to a friend, go to a Labour Party meeting if you're Jewish. I couldn't do that to someone I cared about.
Yeah, it's been a really nasty experience as a Jew in the Labour Party.
Since 2015, it's been soul-destroying being a member of the Labour Party and Jewish.
We feel like we don't belong here, and we have to do far more than anybody else to be accepted.
It absolutely breaks my heart to say, but I do not think the Labour Party is a safe space for Jewish people anymore.
And they might not call me a dirty Jew, but they'll call me a dirty Zionist.
I've seen friends of mine being reduced to tears.
Curiously, at no time during the programme are these people named, with one exception, nor are any of them attributed to any other organisation. In fact, they are not the drive-by Jewish Labour members we are led to believe. At the time of the broadcast, meet Ella Rose, director, no less, of the Jewish Labour Movement, or JLM. This strongly pro-Israel organisation routinely attacks as anti-Semites those who call for action against Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people. Or there's Alex Richardson, JLM membership officer. Or Stefan Savary, JLM national vice chair. In fact, all 7 of the witnesses are not only JLM members, but officers of its executive committee. As committed Zionists, they're already well known in grassroots politics. Our first witness, Ella Rose, is also a former employee at the Israeli embassy, seen here with an embassy delegation to the British government on how to avoid Israel boycotts, and here with Israeli Ambassador Mark Regev on the right, and Jeremy Newmark, former JLM chair. Perhaps Ms. Rose is not quite the delicate flower we are presented with. She was caught by Al Jazeera's undercover camera discussing how she might deal with one of her political opponents, Labour activist Jackie Walker.
I saw Jackie Walker on Saturday and thought, you know what, I can take her. She's like 5'2" and tiny. That's why I can take Jackie Walker. Krav Maga training. Yeah, I'm not bad. If it came to it, I would win. That's all I really care about.
The impression offered by the programme is that this is the only Jewish lay member view of the Labour Party. but there are many others, and very much opposed. For example, Jewish Voice for Labour is a sizable body of Jews on the left of the party, with a very different attitude and experience. Graham Bash, its political officer, was interviewed back in March 2018 by the BBC, no less.
I know what anti-Semitism is. I've experienced it all my life, especially when I was young. And I've been in the Labour Party for 50 years. And to me, the party's always been a safe haven from anti-Semitism, a safe place for me to be a Jew. I've been a party member all this time in 8 different constituency parties, and once in 50 years have I ever witnessed an incident of anti-Semitism.
Co-chair Leah Levain leaves no doubt as to her opinion on the subject.
What is happening is disproportionality, as if the Labour Party is rife with anti-Semites. It's such a lot of nonsense.
As a Jew on the left, who is intensely anti-racist and intensely aware of what anti-Semitism is and how dangerous it is, to be called an anti-Semite oneself is about as low as it gets. It's a bit like being accused of paedophilia or something. I cannot really think of anything worse. And it undermines the fight against real anti-Semitism. This is one of the most frightening things for me. People have been weaponising accusations of anti-Semitism for political ends. The fact that that is going on seriously undermines and endangers our chances of dealing with genuine anti-Semitism, which is a real threat in our society.
Then there are the ultra-Orthodox Jews, many of whom also disagree. The Union of Orthodox Hebrew Congregations issued a statement representing thousands of Orthodox Jews.
We were shocked to learn about those that are claiming in the media that the Jews of Britain are outraged towards the Labour Party's respected leader, Jeremy Corbyn. They have spread rumours that the Jewish population are considering leaving the country, for fear he becomes Prime Minister. We have no connection whatsoever with these irresponsible remarks.
In fact, during Jeremy Corbyn's tenure, immigration to Israel actually went down. Throughout the programme, no lay voices expressing these opposite opinions were allowed, though they were well known to the BBC. The second group of witnesses were 8 ex-Labour Party officials, both named and attributed. These, to a man and woman, were highly critical of Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters.
I am heartbroken and disgusted that the party that I joined over a decade ago is now institutionally racist.
So there's an increase in members from a particular perspective, and they brought with them a particular worldview, which unfortunately allowed breathing space for anti-Semitism to arise.
We had what was akin to a civil war in the party, and our role was to try and bring some civility back into the proceedings. It was huge. The problem was massive, and it absolutely wasn't constructed by embittered old Blairites, as we were frequently described as. It was real. It still is real.
Were you all Blairites?
No, absolutely not.
But a lengthy internal report based on emails and chat groups operated by these same staffers and their colleagues was leaked to the public in 2020. It paints an altogether different picture. The verbatim record in this report is a litany of abusive language and antagonistic activity against Jeremy Corbyn, his leadership team, and his supporters right from the start. Staff discussed hanging and burning Corbyn and calling him that fucking trot, or Trotskyist. Said that any Labour MP who nominates Corbyn deserves to be taken out and shot. Senior staff argued they have to get rid of him in the next couple of months or the trots will embed themselves. He has to go, even if it must be forced. These were more than just words. Staff busily engaged in vetting new applicants to see if they might be Corbyn supporters, in order to refuse them entry. During the 2016 leadership election, they used computer-based searches through existing members' social media to look for critical remarks about their own favoured MPs and notables, so that the presumed pro-Corbyn authors could be suspended. However weak and temporary the suspension, the member would be unable to vote. The required damage would have been done. According to the report, these validation exercises flagged 11,250 members and supporters. Sam Matthews and Kat Buckingham would review these and decide which to proceed with. All of this under the auspices of General Secretary Ian McNicol. Kat Buckingham observed that they were busy
playing trot or not,
while
real work is piling up,
including work on anti-Semitism cases. She wrote,
I had some drinks in the office until Jeremy came in, and then all I wanted to do was go home.
She remarked to a colleague,
well, at least your job isn't about to be purged by an aged trot.
An attempt was made to prevent new members from voting in the coming ballot. This was successfully challenged in court. Buckingham commented to a colleague,
you do realise that if we lose this case today we are basically fucked.
When an election for Brighton constituency Labour Party executive resulted in a left-wing victory, bogus complaints about procedures were used to suspend the local party and nullify the result. She said,
I say act now, and worry about rules and legal issues later.
Our role was to try and bring some civility back into the proceedings.
Not much civility there. After Corbyn's unexpected success in the 2017 election, she expected to leave her job.
That's my hope. We all get taken out and shot, and given a wad of cash. They'll have to try and work out which of us are Blairite.
Thought there weren't any Blairites.
Were you all Blairites?
No, absolutely not.
Mike Crichton and others engaged in routine abuse of left-wing members. When a colleague expressed her hope that one of them dies in a fire, Crichton rejoined, that's a very bad wish, but if he does, I wouldn't piss on him to put him out. In the 2016 leadership election, Crichton and Ian McNicol supported a bizarre interpretation of the rules, requiring Jeremy Corbyn to obtain nominations from the very MPs who were trying to bounce him out of office, knowing this would force him off the ballot paper. When the NEC narrowly voted this down, McNicol said, this is the first time the unions have actually chosen to fuck the party rather than support it.
We had a really good team. We worked really closely together. We were all we all became friends through doing that job. But there was an increasing darkness.
Hogan, then a member of the anti-Corbyn Labour First group, was perhaps referring to anyone who writes in who doesn't sound like a trotlodyte, I'm giving to the membership team to sign up. Jez's speech was a total crock of shit, hunting through anarchists and trots to purge them too, but doing very little to process anti-Semitism complaints, the report says. In fact, the report throughout flatly contradicts the accusation that the leadership was preventing action. On the contrary, it was the governance and legal unit staff who repeatedly failed to progress cases, even high-profile ones. Perhaps the worst examples of this concern Sam Matthews, who became head of disputes in December 2016. In the documentary, Matthews assertively denounced the party as institutionally racist and left no doubt that the reason was the leadership's interference in the disciplinary process, preventing progress. But the report demonstrates decisively, with case after case, that it was completely the other way round. It was Matthews, and sometimes his colleagues, who repeatedly delayed, disdained, or ignored anti-Semitism complaints. It was the leadership office, often chased by press, TV or complainants, who asked in vain for real progress from Matthews' staff. Take the case of member CC, who was complained of regarding Holocaust denial in August 2016. Anne Black was head of the National Executive Committee Disputes Panel at the time. From 11th October 2017 onwards, she repeatedly asked Matthews for progress on this case. He replied that a notice of investigation would be sent to CC on that same day, the 11th. Queried by Black at the end of the month, he asserted that he was waiting for CC's response before proceeding. In fact, no notice of investigation had been issued. The case had not even been formally logged. Further emails from Black received no reply. It was only when CC's critics raised a petition that Matthews finally issued a suspension notice in March 2018, over 18 months late. The GLU staff were empowered to send notices of investigation or suspension to ordinary members without the leader's office approval. The report states bluntly, Matthews appears to have been the main blockage to action on anti-Semitism cases, and the few cases that were acted upon were mostly the result of other senior Labour staff directly chasing him. Then there's the curious case of Ben Westerman.
Ben Westerman received dozens of complaints. While interviewing one member, he was confronted with the very anti-Semitism he'd been investigating.
And we finished the interview. The person got up to leave the room and then turned back to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "What do you mean, where am I from?" And she said, "I asked you, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm not prepared to discuss this." And they said, "Are you from Israel?" What can you say to that? You are assumed to be in cahoots with the Israeli government. It's this obsession with that just spills over all the time into anti-Semitism.
Unfortunately for the credibility of Westerman's story, the two ladies he spoke to recorded the conversations that took place. Here are the key phrases.
There's nothing more for me to say on that.
Okay. I don't know whether you want to.
No, I'm just curious because I haven't been in the Labour Party very long and I've certainly never been to anything like this informal interview before. So I'm just curious about, like, what branch are you in?
I don't think that's relevant.
Oh, okay.
I hope that's okay. I'm sorry, I don't think where I'm from is at all relevant to the investigation.
Yeah, I just misunderstood. I thought the investigation bit about me not being a silent witness was...
No, it is. You're more than welcome to ask questions, but I reserve the right to not answer them, and I feel that's a question about my personal situation, which I don't think is relevant to the situation in Full Riverside.
Note the question concerning which branch Westerman is from. No mention of Israel or anything concerning Jews. The two ladies insist that there was nothing said outside the recording, nor do any other of Westerman's interviewees recall any relevant discussion. Mr. Ware does not mention, or has not bothered to find out, that the two 74-year-old ladies are, like Westerman, Jewish. Anti-Semitic? On 28 April 2016, during a BBC Radio London interview, this happened.
Let's remember, when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism. His boy went mad and they ended up killing 6 million Jews. But the simple fact in all of this is that Naz made these comments at a time when there's another brutal Israeli attack on the Palestinians.
History, you're a disgusting racist.
You're saying it's not true?
Yes, you're a lying racist.
Really? Why don't you go and check
A
your
Nazi
history?
apologist. A
Check
Nazi
history.
apologist.
Check your history.
A Nazi apologist. You're a disgusting Nazi apologist, Livingstone. Writing history. Go back and check what Hitler did.
In fact, what historians know is that this is a gross misreading of history, one that's deeply offensive to Jews.
In fact, what historians know is that Livingstone's remarks were almost entirely accurate and can be easily verified, as we shall see. The avalanche of hysteria that followed was not far removed from John Mann's street thug approach here. Any number of notable public figures denounced the remarks as anti-Semitic, with the same lazy ignorance shown by John Ware.
Mr. Livingstone, do you therefore take the view that while virtually everyone else in this country considers that your remarks were totally inaccurate and ridiculous, you stand by those remarks? What troubles me about Ken Livingstone is that his history was completely wrong and false.
Livingstone remarked,
Appalling and inexcusable.
Suggested he should be kicked out of the party.
Viewers might want to judge for themselves with this simple exercise. Select your favourite search engine on the internet, type the words Hitler Zionist Transfer Agreement, and observe the result. Of the many entries, a useful one has the words Yad Vashem in the descriptor. Here you will find the transfer agreement and the boycott movement, a Jewish dilemma on the eve of the Holocaust. Professor Weiss, an eminent Jewish Israeli historian, made this 33-page document for Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial Center in Jerusalem. She writes,
In the summer of 1933, the Jewish Agency for Palestine, the German Zionist Federation, and the German Economics Ministry drafted a plan meant to allow German Jews emigrating to Palestine to retain some of the value of their property in Germany by purchasing German goods for the Yishuv, which would redeem them in Palestine local currency. This scheme, known as the Transfer Agreement or Havara.
She goes on to discuss the controversial nature of the agreement, particularly with respect to the split it caused in the Jewish community. Many regarded it as a gross betrayal by the Zionist minority, breaching as it did the internationally organized Jewish boycott of German goods, a response to Hitler's increasing anti-Semitic activity. Given the armies of researchers available to MPs and journalists alike, they could surely have easily discovered the true picture, as we have just done here. But they weren't interested, even in those many local Jews who personally told Livingstone he was right. From this point on, reality, history, facts all seemed to disappear as politicians, journalists, media, commentators and celebrities raged about the supposed hurt caused to Jewish people by Livingstone's words. Faced with imminent expulsion and concerned not to cause further controversy for Jeremy Corbyn, Ken Livingstone resigned from the party. The second part of Livingstone's radio remarks regarding brutal Israeli attacks on the Palestinians was ignored. The Palestinians' very real hurt is not important. Jackie Walker's case is another example of willful institutional blindness. Black, Jewish, a lifelong campaigner and lecturer against racism, she had her words on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust deliberately twisted and distorted by pro-Zionist critics in order to brand her an anti-Semite. A private Facebook exchange with a friend was hacked into and sent to the Labour Party. It included the phrase, "Many Jews, my ancestors too, were the chief financiers of the sugar and slave trade." Walker explained that she meant among the chief financiers, which is historically correct. However, members of the Jewish Labour movement, remember them, subsequently reported her for comments she had made at party conference concerning the Nazi and African slave holocausts, the security arrangements for Jewish school children, and defining anti-Semitism, none of which could remotely be considered anti-Semitic. It didn't matter. The JLM and other pro-Israel groups were offended. Once again, the feeding frenzy had begun, and nothing could stop it. Objections from eminent international scholars and other notables were ignored. So a black, Jewish, anti-racist campaigner was accused of prejudicial and grossly detrimental behaviour and expelled from the party. According to Panorama,
the disputes team asked Louise Withers-Green to interview Miss Walker.
What was the charge that the disputes team was bringing against Jackie Walker?
Jackie Walker had said a number of very offensive things. She said that the Jews were financiers of the slave trade. She suggested that Jews were unwelcoming to black people.
John Ware then asserts that the leader's office tried to find ways of influencing Labour's main disciplinary body, the NCC, regarding the Walker case.
Mr. Corbyn's closest advisers discussed how they might exercise some control over the NCC.
This email chain, which includes some of Mr. Corbyn's closest advisers, reveals what appears to have been an attempt to interfere with the selection of the NCC panel hearing the Jackie Walker case. One message from the General Secretary, Jenny Formby, says, and I quote,
"The NCC cannot be allowed to continue in the way that they are at the moment, and I will also be challenging the panel for the Jackie Walker case."
This very selective extract from the email ignores the subsequent text, which, together with documentation associated with the leaked Labour report, completely upends Ware's accusations. Shortly after Jenny Formby became General Secretary, Sam Matthews told her that his governance and legal unit, and no one else, had deliberately delayed Jackie Walker's case in order to first prove out the existing NCC panel on other cases, so as to ensure that she would be disciplined. Formby was concerned about the legal implications if this manipulation became public. The accused members' lawyers would have had an open goal against the party. The email text that Ware misses out clearly indicates this.
And I will also be challenging on the panel for the Jackie Walker case, to make it clear that no one on the panels for
the other two cases
can be on Jackie's case, in view of what I was told by Sam Matthews in relation to the deliberate decision to delay it by over a year. A delay for which Jeremy has of course had to bear the blame.
We are bound to ask why John Ware refused to disclose this vital part of the email. Did he ask Matthews for an explanation?
The NCC cannot be allowed to continue in the way that they are.
This part of the email refers to frustration with the delays in proceedings of the Walker and other cases. Formby was intent on speeding them up, not preventing the expulsions. The rapid increase in case completion after Formby's appointment testifies to this. Ware's habit of muddling issues with bits of email is repeated in our next example.
Mr. Corbyn and his office have repeatedly said that when party members are accused of anti-Semitism, they don't interfere in the disciplinary process.
But that doesn't seem to be the case. In an email, Mr. Corbyn's Director of Communications, Seamus Milne, asked for a review of the disciplinary process into anti-Semitic complaints. There was a risk, he said, of muddling up political disputes with racism.
In March 2018, Sam Matthews did suspend left-winger Glyn Secker, who is Jewish. Complaints poured in and brought queries from press officer James Schneider and later Seamus Milne about the evidence involved. Matthews and Executive Director Emily Oldknow knew the case was weak and tried to add more evidence, but it remained weak. Milne remarked on this and was asked by Oldknow for his view. It was Milne's email reply which John Ware and Matthews latched onto in the documentary. In his eagerness to convict the party leaders of interference, Ware again ignores a vital element in all of these issues. Milne says in the email,
"None of the posts can be identified as anti-Semitic. Several of them quite clearly relate to political arguments within the Jewish community, between Jewish Zionists and Jewish anti-Zionists. Add to that this member is a Jewish activist, the son of a Holocaust survivor. It's pretty clear that we're misidentifying political arguments for antisemitism. But if we're more than very occasionally using disciplinary action against Jewish members for antisemitism, something's going wrong, and we're muddling up political disputes with racism. Quite apart from this specific case, I think going forward we need to review where and how we're drawing the line, if we're going to have clear and defensible processes."
This highlighted a very tricky procedural issue rather than just an individual case. It remained, however, the responsibility of Governance and Legal Unit to decide on Secker. They always knew the case was poor and withdrew the suspension. If, as Matthews suggests, the staff were going in fear of head office on these issues, it didn't show. Later that same month, Dan Hogan, accompanied by Louise Withers Green, acted as prosecutor in an NCC disciplinary case against party member Cyril Chilson. In a bizarre proceeding, Chilson was expelled on the grounds of anti-Semitism, mainly concerning his tweets about Israeli atrocities in the occupied Palestinian territories. Cyril Chilson is Jewish. He is also the son of a Holocaust survivor mother and a father who narrowly escaped the Nazi invasion of Eastern Europe and became a war hero in the Russian Air Force. Cyril was born in Israel and served as a captain in the Israeli army. Graduating with distinction at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, he later moved to Oxford as a college teacher. He has never made negative remarks about Jews as Jews, and yet he is expelled from Labour as an anti-Semite. Improbable though this sounds, it is an example of a recurring theme in this narrative, that of the wrong sort of Jew. To examine what is going on here, we turn to the two experts fielded by John Ware to ask if Labour is anti-Semitic, or rather to tell us that it is. Alan Johnson and Dave Rich.
It's completely possible to criticise Israel within the Labour Party and not come near an anti-Semitism charge. You can say the occupation is wrong, you can say the settlements are wrong, you can say that the treatment of the Arab minority is discriminatory.
At least Johnson has the decency to even mention the elephant in the room in all of this, the Palestinian people. He continues,
"But if you say Israel is an inherently racist endeavour that should therefore be abolished, that's something different."
Perhaps, but is it anti-Semitic? A long-established worldwide human rights organisation, Human Rights Watch, declared in an April 2021 report, Israeli authorities today are committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. Even a prominent Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, concluded in January 2021, the Israeli regime enacts in all the territory it controls an apartheid regime, advancing and perpetuating the supremacy of one group, Jews, over another, Palestinians. Some argue that you cannot reform an apartheid state, only abolish it and replace it with a state where all citizens are at least politically equal, as in the case of South Africa, for example. We do not debate this here, merely present it as a legitimate opinion. Next we hear from Dave Rich, stern critic of the Labour left.
If you look back at the kind of anti-Semitism that existed in the 1930s, Jews using their money, Jews controlling governments, but instead you started to see the same ideas but being directed towards Israel. These kind of ideas are much more acceptable on the left and in pro-Palestinian campaigning circles because they talk about Israel. They don't talk about Jews, but actually underneath the surface, it's the same ideas.
This has become a significant argument, used repeatedly to denounce Israel's critics. It argues that opposition to Israel or Zionism are merely covers for anti-Jewish hate. Briefly then, some definitions. Anti-Semitism equals hostility to or prejudice against Jews, as Jews. Zionism equals the establishment of a national home for Jewish people in the land of Palestine. The controversial part is the last phrase, since this is already populated with mostly Muslim Arab peoples. Zion is the old biblical name for the area in and around Jerusalem, effectively Palestine. Anti-Zionism equals opposition to the Zionist colonial project. We argue, therefore, that anti-Zionism does not equal anti-Semitism. They are two quite different things. To illustrate this, imagine if we did accept that criticizing the Israeli government was simply a cover for prejudice against Judaism. Then such logic would apply to all countries, races and religions. So when Prime Minister Theresa May laid into Vladimir Putin over the Salisbury poisonings, she was really expressing her hatred for the Russian Orthodox Church. Or some people criticized Donald Trump's opposition to climate change science only because they've got it in for the Quakers. The statement that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism seems equally crass when we look at Judaism in Europe up to the Second World War. Amongst European Jews, barely a few percent were Zionists. Most Jews despised Zionism as echoing the views of the anti-Semites, namely that Jews should get out and go somewhere else. Were all these anti-Zionists anti-Semitic? Jewish opinion has swung towards sympathy for Israel in the present, but not universally. Many ultra-Orthodox Jews regard the Israeli state as a blasphemy against the teachings of the Bible. You don't get much more devoutly Jewish than these folk. Are they anti-Semites also, or just the wrong sort of Jew? Dave Rich continues,
For someone who insists he's such a principled anti-racist and he always opposes anti-Semitism, it is extraordinary the number of times he finds himself alongside people who have a record of expressing views or doing things that are completely the opposite of the anti-racism he claims.
In 2012, Mr. Corbyn campaigned to allow a notoriously anti-Semitic preacher activist into Britain. Raed Salah had called Jews the germs of all time.
There really is no excuse for this. The truth about Raed Salah and the false accusations against him are well known. if Ware and company are prepared to report them. Raed Saleh is a Palestinian preacher and poet who advocates strongly for Palestinian rights. The Israeli government hates him and constantly harasses and arrests him on bogus charges. In 2011, a Jewish private defense organization, the Community Security Trust, CST, took it upon themselves to alert the Home Office that Saleh had been invited to speak in Britain. Theresa May had no hesitation in issuing a deportation order against Saleh. Challenged in court, the Home Office accused Saleh of preaching hatred against Jews, citing a poem he had authored, as misrepresented here by John Ware. Saleh was able to conclusively prove that his poem was against all oppressors and that the word Jews had been inserted by other parties to discredit him. He condemns anti-Semitism and racism. Rabbi Meir Hirsch has said of him, "The good sheikh has consistently expressed his friendship and brotherhood for the Jewish people, and publicly embraced myself and my Jewish brethren countless times. The idea of Sheikh Raed Saleh being charged in the United Kingdom with anti-Semitism is astounding." The judge accepted Saleh's testimony and ruled in his favour. Oh, and the aforementioned organisation that colluded with the Home Office, the CST, has as its policy director Dave Rich. John Ware thought it unnecessary to inform us of this. He also fails to advise us that Alan Johnson works for BICOM, the British-Israeli Communications Organisation. Both the CST and BICOM have strong sympathies with Israel. Rich in particular is fond of using insinuation, innuendo, and guilt by association to make his case. He wrote a critical report to the Labour Party concerning Jackie Walker's discussion on Jews and the slave trade. He cited Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam as having written on the same subject in a divisive and sectarian manner, which Walker condemns. No matter, both have referred to Jews and the slave trade, or maybe the weather in Nebraska, so she is tarred with the same brush.
The left always thinks of itself as anti-racist, but all you do is you swap in the word Zionist instead of Jewish, or Israeli instead of Jewish, and suddenly the language is cleansed. It's acceptable on the left.
Or if you dine with someone who doesn't like cabbage, just replace cabbage with Jews, and there's another anti-Semite. No arguments from experts with a different view were allowed. People such as
anti-Semitism is not a real phenomenon within the Labour Party.
The issue was not institutional anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. There is no institutional racism in the Labour Party.
There is certainly no shortage of reputable scholars to choose from. The opinions we have heard. What about the evidence? Broad-based scholarly analysis based on data, numbers, charts and tables concerning this issue. Let's look first at the reports showing clearly that the party is suffering from widespread, deep-seated institutional anti-Semitism. That's right, there aren't any. Even the House of Commons all-party report on anti-Semitism, which was scathing in its attacks on Ken Livingstone, Jeremy Corbyn, Jackie Walker et al., for all the wrong reasons, stopped well short of convicting the party of institutional racism regarding Jews. It did suggest that all parties, in fact, had problems with disciplinary procedures on race issues. So let us examine reports to the contrary. The investigation by Shami Chakrabarti, former head of the UK human rights organisation Liberty, stated in its foreword,
The Labour Party is not overrun by anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or other forms of racism.
It did acknowledge
minority hateful or ignorant attitudes and behaviours festering within a sometimes bitter incivility of discourse. This has no place in a modern democratic socialist party.
The report received criticism from many sides, not least because Ms. Chakrabarti joined the Labour Party and was later made a Labour peer, though this is not unusual. So let us consider a more independent body, the well-respected Institute for Jewish Policy Research. In Anti-Semitism in Contemporary Great Britain, a study of attitudes towards Jews and Israel, it concluded,
looking at the political spectrum of British society, the most anti-Semitic group consists of those who identify as very right-wing. In this group about 14% hold hardcore anti-Semitic attitudes, and 52% hold at least one attitude, compared again to 3.6% and 30% in the general population. The very left-wing, and, in fact, all political groups located on the left, are no more anti-Semitic than the general population.
Finally, a look at the figures within the Labour Party give a developing but clear picture. After the go-slow tactics of the staff under Ian McNicol were replaced by Jenny Formby's new regime in 2018, an intense and accelerated programme of discipline management and processing was introduced, as these figures show. During the period in question, a total of 56 members were expelled. 19 were auto-excluded for direct breach of rules, while 116 resigned. We cannot assume that the resignees were admitting any guilt, because many resigned in disgust. So 75 members were actually removed for anti-Semitism issues, out of over 1,000 complaints investigated. Of a party membership of over 550,000, this constitutes 0.01364%. We do not consider this represents widespread, deep-seated anti-Semitism. We have criticised the Panorama programme in a number of ways. Firstly, a group of witnesses was presented, unnamed and unattributed, as though they were a random cross-section of Jewish Labour Party members. The fact that they not only belong to a strongly Zionist faction, but are its leading officers, seems designed to convince the public that there is only one point of view on the subject, when there are in fact several. None of the alternatives were offered. The programme title suggests an inquiry: is Labour anti-Semitic? This is not the methodology of an inquiry. Secondly, the vociferous testimony of the ex-Labour Party staff against their former organisation does not stand examination against the record of their own written statements, views and actions during their tenure of office. On the specific issue of anti-Semitism and its disciplinary processes, their position resembles that of a person caught with their hands in the till, pointing and shouting, "Stop thief." In addition, the leaked Labour Party report describes practices which give the appearance of shameless ballot rigging and undermining of factional opponents. So determined were they to destroy the members' choice of leadership, they were prepared to abandon their responsibilities in the 2017 general election, including the unauthorised allocation of party funds towards favoured MPs, and hoped that a bad result would bring the change at the top they so wanted. The party report in question was not made public until some 8 months after the programme was aired, so the production team could not have known of the written record. It could be argued that they were duped by the party staff, who perhaps told them what they wanted to hear. On the other hand, there has been no retraction, correction or apology from John Ware, his team or the BBC at any time since these revelations. On the contrary, Ware continues to aggressively sue those critics who attack his form of investigative journalism. Thirdly, the highly selected choice of experts reflects the same technique used with the Jewish witnesses. Both men have knowledge and qualifications, but their loyalties to their very partisan Zionist organizations are again concealed. They are not by any measure independent. This is demonstrated in their firm presumption that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism, a misplaced logic designed to weaponize anti-Semitism against critics of Israel. Fourthly, the near wholesale disregard for facts and figures, most of which disprove Panorama's accusations, extends from ignoring detailed reports into the realm of crude falsehoods regarding individuals such as Ken Livingstone, Jackie Walker, and Sheikh Raed Saleh. On the basis of the evidence submitted here, as well as that in the programme, the answer to the question, is Labour anti-Semitic, must surely be a resounding no. Of course there will be a small number of actual anti-Semites in a party of over 500,000 members, also some thieves, vandals, wife-beaters, etc., as in any large grouping. But the idea that the party is riddled with this plague is fraudulent nonsense. So just what is going on here? Why the big smear? We review some footage to suggest an answer.
Because they talk about Israel, they don't talk about Jews, but actually underneath the surface, it's the same ideas.
We argue that Panorama talks about Jews and anti-Semitism because it does not want to talk about Israel. When Israel commits atrocities in the illegally occupied West Bank or Gaza, demolishes Palestinian homes, steals their land and resources, and detains thousands without trial, these actions have no defence, legal or moral. So its hardcore supporters don't want to talk about the Israeli army or the ongoing consequences of violently imposed Zionism. They would much rather rail about anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, and even Holocaust denial at supporters of the Palestinians. Hear the words of former Israeli government Minister for Education, Shulamit Aloni.
Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong.
So a pattern emerges in which support for Palestinian rights is falsely associated with Jew hate. Corbyn's right-wing enemies, most particularly within the Labour Party itself, jumped gleefully onto the bandwagon. Panorama was John Ware's and the BBC's contribution. The Panorama programme goes to great lengths not to investigate the Labour Party, but to prosecute it. To those who know the facts, it fails miserably, but otherwise its appallingly one-sided presentation must have had some effect on the public. In the days that followed, the BBC received hundreds of complaints, some of them highly detailed, challenging every aspect of the production piece by piece. The corporation responded uniformly to everyone with a message that included,
to allow us to reply promptly to your concerns, and to ensure we use our license fee resources as efficiently as possible, we're sending this response to everyone. We're sorry that for this reason, we can't reply personally to you, on each point which has been made. The BBC stands by its journalism, and we completely reject any accusations of bias or dishonesty.
And that was that. Unbelievably, in 2020, this travesty was nominated for a BAFTA TV award. You couldn't make it up. It's difficult to know how much effect all this had on Labour's defeat in the 2019 election. But Corbyn's team seemed paralysed by the onslaught, repeatedly apologising and retreating, perhaps in the hope that the issue would fade. It did not. The predatory Zionist groups only escalated their demands. Corbyn fatally introduced a fast-track expulsion system for the worst cases, and even pressed for its use, against some of his own best supporters. The zeal and ignorance of Jenny Formby's revamped team is clear from the leaked Labour Party report, as people were suspended or expelled for the slightest deviation from the required norms. Key activists such as Tony Greenstein, Ken Livingstone, Mark Wadsworth, Jackie Walker, Cyril Chilson, even MP Chris Williamson were drummed out on entirely bogus grounds. And yet when Corbyn's people resigned in defeat, things got far worse. His successor, Keir Starmer, used Corbyn's own fast-track system to destroy the left, including Corbyn himself. It is now an offence even to question the existence of widespread anti-Semitism in the party. New General Secretary Dave Evans, openly contemptuous of party democracy, has gone on a rampage against constituency parties and their officials, suspending and expelling anyone who dares to criticise the dear leader and his publicly declared enthusiasm for Israeli supremacy. Principal targets are, wait for it, Jewish critics of Zionism, stalwart party members of long standing among them, perhaps the most significant supporters of Palestinian rights, who have risen bravely above ethnic loyalties. The complicity in all this of our mass media, including the BBC, has to be challenged.